Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Julio Godinez, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, Improve AWS Cloud Threat Detection and Response, MITRE ATT&CK Framework, brought to you by AWS and Sysdig. We have a great webinar for you today, but before we get started, I need to go through some housekeeping announcements. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any part of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending out a link to access the webinar on demand, or you can visit devops.com/webinars, and it will be available for you as well. We are taking questions from the audience throughout the presentation. Use your webinar interface to submit questions into the Q&A section, and we will try to get to as many as possible at the end. Finally, stick around until the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so stay tuned to see if you're the winner. Joining me today is Daniela Pontes, Security Product Marketing Manager, and Aaron Eidelman, Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. I'm now going to put myself on mute, turn off my camera, and let you begin.
Hello, everybody. This is Daniela Pontes, and today we are going to talk about how you can improve your AWS Cloud Threat Detection and Response using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Let's start by taking a look at the agenda. First, we are going to have an overview of the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, and Aaron will do that overview. And after that, I will talk about the TTPs and give you examples. We are going to see a live demo, recorded live demo, and then we are going to switch hats to the defense side. We are going to talk an outstanding open source project out there called Falco, and we are going to talk a little bit about Sysdig, and then we can start with our Q&A. So Aaron, now is with you.
Thank you so much for that, Danielle. So great to have everyone here today. MITRE ATT&CK is such an interesting new take on security that over the past, over the time since it started has really changed a lot of the ways that we're able to discuss threats as opposed to just vulnerabilities. So let's start with that notion of what a threat is as opposed to a vulnerability, and of how MITRE ATT&CK helps us to think differently about it. You may be familiar with the notion of CVE. And again, this is something that the MITRE Corporation maintains. But a CVE, common vulnerabilities and exposures, pertains to a specific thing or weakness that can be exploited by an attacker. What makes TTPs different is that this is more a behavior of an attacker. And so, whereas with a CVE, once you patch it, you can pretty much rest assured that that particular issue is not going to come up. There could still be a threat that operates by some other means. Likewise, you may be familiar with the notion in forensics of an indicator of compromise, an IOC. And again, this could be something like a file hash, some particular occurrence in a log file, for example, that indicates something isn't doing what it's supposed to. But again, an attacker can anticipate this and work around it. What's unique about TTPs is that it's a lot more difficult for attackers to disguise their behavior. They will need to repeat their behavior at some point. So this is why using TTPs as a method of detection is something that is a little bit more future-proof and something that you can rely on a bit more. So in terms of why we're talking about this in terms of an attack as opposed to from a defensive perspective, many times when creating a defensible architecture or when looking at your system, a typical pattern is to start from resources and work backwards. But what's different about MITRE ATT&CK is that it gives you the adversary's perspective. It goes through the entire life cycle of an attack in order to look at all the various points where an attacker is making a decision and following a certain behavior or pattern. And as far as how you would approach this framework and look at it and try to understand how it applies to your workload, MITRE ATT&CK is structured as a matrix. So everything is laid out into specific categories based on the stage of the attack. And as you can see here, in terms of navigating this matrix, although it may look overwhelming at first, you have the ability to filter down specific tactics, different threat groups, so advanced persistent threats, different types of software, different attack surfaces, et cetera, to really narrow in on the concern that you have. So for example, there is a cloud matrix that specifically focuses on threats to the cloud. And this filtering capability, although there's quite a comprehensive list of different types of TTPs that you could explore, makes it easy for you to narrow down a specific list that I think Daniela will show us later today. So now if we think about this in terms of, different perspectives, right? Today we've moved a bit beyond just the vulnerability discovery that comes along in a pen test to really looking at how we detect and respond to various behaviors. So this is where red and blue teams have entered the picture as a new way to test security at a more mature angle. What's important to note about this change is that we're no longer just looking at attacks from, say, an external perspective. Something that red and blue teams give us the ability to do is incorporate many different vectors. So say a social engineering attack that results in getting credentials, that results in access to an environment. It gives us the ability to assume breach and say, assuming we've patched known vulnerabilities, let's say an attacker already gets inside. And this is a very healthy perspective to take given how often social engineering tends to succeed. So assume breach is a very, is an important perspective to add to the table in addition to just those external angles. But really where MITRE ATT&CK serves red and blue teams is in terms of providing a means of communication. The purpose of a red team is ultimately to improve a blue team. And the way to do that is to communicate through some shared language of what it is that they're focused on. So you could say, for a blue team, maybe my concern is looking at a specific set of threats. And so I want to basically have the red team test me on that. And that allows the red team to meet the blue team where they're at. Otherwise, they're always going to win, and there's not really that return on investment. So in terms of how it helps to provide this common language, we spoke earlier about thinking from the perspective of the attacker. Well, this is often much easier said than done and very presumptuous, right? A security architect, even one who's very experienced, may not know how the latest threat actors are actually thinking and operating. What's great about MITRE ATT&CK is it looks at known persistent threats, right? These are often large cybercriminal organizations or nation state actors, and it's able to look at their pattern of behavior historically and anticipate what type of industries, what type of segments would this particular threat actor be targeting? What's their typical MO? What type of tools are they known to use? What type of data are they after? Do they tend to persist and kind of hang out in an environment before an attack, or are they pretty quick in terms of their behavior? So it really gives you a realistic understanding of the adversary that's very different from a hypothetical approach. And so ultimately, what you get out of MITRE ATT&CK and why it's an angle you may want to take, why, for example, when you look at Amazon Guard Duty findings, we define, threat purposes using MITRE ATT&CK. It gives you an ability to stay ahead of the attacks that you're facing, because it's not just a cat and mouse game of looking at CVEs and vulnerabilities. It's really anticipating, regardless of what the threat actor is exploiting, how are they behaving? That is fundamentally what is going to be pretty much the same. And then, also the other problem that it helps us solve is in terms of sharpening our threat detection and response. So we're no longer just thinking about patching and being purely proactive. We're also thinking about, well, in the worst case scenario, supposing they get past all the defenses, how am I going to act then? And that's the crucial question that defines a mature security program. So of course, now that containers are on the rise, there's an increased need for this type of threat awareness at the container level. And that's where AWS's partnership with a partner like Sysdig is extremely important. So I'm going to pass it over to Daniela now to show us everything I've talked about in action.
Thank you, Aaron. So let's take a dive into, the specific TTPs that we have been observed applied against, cloud infrastructure as service. So initial access, the name already says it, is the initial foothold that they have in your environment. And we have three main techniques applied to it. One is exploiting public-facing application, and we will see this in action in our demo today. But another one that I wanted to call attention to is trusted relationship. Cloud native environment is distributed by native. That's what gives it the agility. That's what gives you the focus to concentrate on your core competency and leverage what others can do best, third-party service out there. And in order for you to bring everything together, you build trusted relationship. But attackers, they are looking for any way that they can penetrate the environment, and they will exploit those relationships as well. So you need to make sure that whatever you have in place, both internally and externally with other players in your environment, must be strong and must follow your security policies. Another thing that I wanted to call attention to is valid account, because this is a technique present in almost every single tactic out there. And what we mean by what is meant by tactic is an immediate goal, something that the attacker is doing to achieve a very immediate goal that is part of an overall plan. And they use valid account because it's a perfect disguise. And they are in the look for, default accounts, guest accounts with easy to guess password, this kind of thing. So you need to make sure that you are on the watch for all these valid accounts that could be an easy target for an attacker. Execution. In this step, what the attacker is trying to do is to use one of your valid users, not the attacker itself, but one of your developers, for example, to do something that will help them to achieve their immediate goal or their final goal. And one common way that we see in cloud native environment, in Kubernetes, in containerized environment, is to provide, some kind of malicious image in public repositories, images with backdoors, images with a vulnerability that can be exploited by the attacker. I have the example here, an image that has the cryo and podman vulnerability, that in Go libraries that can cause DDoS impact in your environment. And they can disguise this malicious image with, very popular ones that are broadly used, like Alpine type of images. And they sometimes just change their name. They may make you believe that this is the latest one. And it's very common for developers to always use the latest image as a best practice. So you need to make sure that your pipeline, your CI/CD pipeline, checks for those kind of image vulnerability or malicious presence. Persistence is it's the attacker invested in getting into an environment, so they want to make sure that they survive to a restart, to a password rotation, or anything that could kick them out of what they already achieved. The way that they go by is doing account manipulation. One common approach is to just upload their own keys, generate and upload their own keys. But another way is to just start adding, tapping into your policies to make sure that they gain the privilege that they need to survive, for example, change in security group. So this is kind of actions that you need to pay attention to, because it could be a sign of a compromise. Privilege escalation, it may sound some kind of similar to what we just described, but in a privilege escalation, the tactic goal is to become an admin kind of user with full power. So what they will do is they will try to get root level access. They will try to add, again, permissions to the role that they are impersonating or that they took over to get more privilege. And from that vantage point, do more, attach more permission to the point where they can just reign in your environment. Defense evasion, this is like the holy grail now, because the attackers, what they want to do is to make sure that the attackers are business people. Now, they want to make sure that they have the best return on investment. So they want to stay in your environment as long as possible. Research reports now shows that, that is still the case that, a breach is not detected in 2-3 months. The dwell time, it's still quite long, quite practically an eternity. And that's because the attackers are trying to stay under the radar. And how they do that in cloud is they will impair defense by turning off or uninstalling or disabling mechanism that the cloud providers put it there for you to really know what is going on and detect those kind of malicious actions. So a common thing that they do is turn off, CloudWatch or CloudTrail. And they do that sometimes right before they act in certain way that they know would be flagged. It's like a turn off and turn on of the lights. And if you are not really detecting the activity in real time, you can totally miss that step. Credential access is like this. Once they are in your environment, they feel comfortable that they cannot be kicked out. They will look for credentials that sometimes stored in your environment, in files, unprotected, and they will look for those kind of treasures, because different from the stolen credentials that they buy in the black market, this is free. And this is really a major gain for them. And one way that they do that in cloud environments is like they use cloud APIs, they use cloud services, and we will see that in action using the metadata API. The demo will clearly show how this can happen. Discovery is the stage in which they will just learning about your environment. They will discover all the assets that is there, the ones that have immediate value, the ones that have future value. They will understand exactly how your environment is defined in terms of resource, in terms of permissions groups. They will learn how to navigate it now. They will know to navigate in case they lose that first initial step in your environment. So this is the phase that they spend collecting information. And one way to do that is quite legitimate. It's like, just use the command line, like any admin would, when they want to understand more what a specific account is doing or being set up for. But the anomalous behavior that they cannot hide is the out of context kind of calls that they make one after the other, clearly trying to gather information. Collection and exfiltration is when they identify the assets they want to take with them, and they are ready to put those assets in a safe location. And sometimes what they do is they transfer to a staging location before they do the exfiltration. So they are quite careful about not being noticed until they reach their final goal, the impact goal that they have in mind. But I have an example here that shows also exfiltration from the outside. There are services that are not under an application architecture umbrella, like the storage buckets, the S3 buckets. They are standalone service that can be accessed from inside or outside, and they have their own access controls. And you need to pay attention to that. There are lots of buckets that developers start, or line of business users start, put information there, forget about, and is not protected. So the attacker can also do exfiltration from the outside. Impact is when the attacker know that their action, will be noticeable. It's have an impact in your environment, and is what they want you to feel. If you detect an attacker at that stage, it's like kind of bad news, because it means that they already did everything that they wanted to do without, you notice their presence, and they are ready for a double extortion or whatever kind of harm they want to sustain on you. The only one that I would say that they will still try to disguise is the resource hijacking, because they may want to stay there, milking that cow eternally if possible. But depending on the group motivation, if it is a reputation, they may want to do a defacement impact. If it is like a political or a espionage kind of thing, they may want to just destruct your data. And if it is for reason ransom, they will just make the data inaccessible to you or your service, disrupted until you pay what they ask for. So we just covered the TTPs for cloud infrastructure as service. Now I want to just to mention to you that the MITRE framework actually have different matrices. They're already ready for you to start using, already filtered and focus on the various environments that you may have in place. And another one that I wanted to call attention is the matrix for the container. Remember that your presence in the cloud is as safe as you make it to be. You need to make sure that the configuration is done right and is kept right. And also you make sure that your workloads and the platform where it runs, like the Kubernetes, is also secured. Now let's go through our live demo. And just so you understand what the demo is about, the attacker will exploit a publicly available or accessible application that has a vulnerability. The vulnerability is Apache Stratus 2. And what this vulnerability allows for is for remote execution, command execution. The attacker would take advantage of that to open up a reverse shell, have access to that environment. From that environment, it will look for ways to move to the cloud account, and from the cloud account, by looking in what are kind of permission and access he got, he will try to hijack resource. So here is how it would play in the MITRE matrix. It will go from exploiting the public facing application to find unsecured credential, to understanding or discovering your environment, what kind of permission that role would allow him to, and then go for his final impact, or for his impact, which is resource hijacking. So let's see it taking place. So here our attacker is using Burp Suite, which is a proxy tool that it's basically used for pen testing. But what it does is it can intercept, web request and response messages and manipulate those messages. He has here a malicious message. In this message, he's trying to exploit the Struts2 vulnerability and run a command to see if he can run a command. And he tries with the ID command, and just to see if he can actually do that. He have that capability. So he tries the ID command, it worked. He tries the who am I command, it worked. I'm root. So he is pretty confident that he can proceed with his attack. By the way, Burp Suite is easily available on the internet, and it's nothing special. And in the internet also, he finds the exactly bash command that he needs to run to open the shell. The only thing that he needs to do is to provide his own IP address. So he does that. And now what he's going to do is to try that command within the malicious message that he has in place in the Burp tool. So let's see if it works. Here, what he's doing is to make sure that he's listening to the 443 port, at the 443 port. So when the shell request comes, it is accepted. Let's see. He's sending the message, the malicious message, and now he will see if he got in, if he can. He opened the shell. Where am I? Yeah, I'm root. So he's in that, he penetrated that environment, and he wants to know his context. He sees that he is in a pod, in a Kubernetes cluster in AWS. So the next step for him is to see what else he can get from that vantage point. And he will try, APIs. He will try commands that he can call from within the pod. And one that he will try is the metadata. With the metadata command, he can get information about that runtime. He will, and he starts discovering what kind of commands he can call and what kind of access he can have. So here he sees, I am, that's promising. And he also have the identity credentials. So he can use the I am with the identity credential. He has the host name. So he can really target the metadata, the data that he wants to find. And what he wants to find is credentials. That's what would allow him to move to another, to move laterally inside of the environment. And he got it. He got credentials for this host role, and he has the key, they have the access key, they have the token, he has everything that he needs to try to log into now, no longer breach into the pod, but to the account, to the cloud account. He doesn't need anymore that shell that he opened. He can use his own computer, so that he's using the credentials that he found completely unprotected. And let's see, who am I there? He will call the command to get information about his user ID. And here it is. He knows everything about that role. He is in a cluster node role, and he has the name, of that role, and he has a user ID, he has account information, he has already a lot of insight into what he landed on. So what he's going to do is to see what he can do with that impersonation. So maybe look what are the policies attached to that role. Let's see what he can see. And he continued calling all these command lines, which is something that any admin can do. And he finds that roles has a policy EC2 run instance, which is quite promising. But he needs to understand better what are the granular permissions to see if he can actually do everything that he wants to do. And he can continue his discovery process, just calling, those command line commands. He has the metadata, everything that he discovered already. He can use to continue his understanding of your environment. So he got more the information that he needs to call for the description of the policies, and here are the detailed permission. And he finds that he can run instance perfect. Now he can continue his attack towards his impact goal, which looks like it's a resource hijack. And he took a look in terms of what kind of resource he has access to with this role, and he can access any resource in this account. That's perfect. He doesn't need to do any more escalation or anything. He just wants to know now about the resource to see what is in there and what kind of information he can collect for this attack and maybe future attacks too. Everything that he is discovering about the account, it's valuable to the attacker. So here he is. He's looking at the EC2 instances available under this account, and he will look for, image IDs. He will look for each one of these image IDs. He would look for what are the internal IP address, the external IP address, the subnets, the DNS information. They look for the size, the type of the instance. So he gets the menu and how to order that menu item. Everything is there. You will make sure that he spend the necessary time to get all the information that he can get about this environment, so he can orchestrate not only this attack, but future attacks as well. He may be trying to run an instance, a small instance, to not call too much attention, maybe something that was already used and stop and just restart, something like that. So let's see what he's going to do. He found this one that has been stopped, and he picks an image ID, the image ID that he wants to run, and he will try to execute on that action to see if he's successful. He's collecting the metadata necessary to run the instance. Yeah, he picked a micro one, and then let's see what happens. Well, yes, AWS is putting the resource together, initiating the resource. And we don't have to wait until it's completely done. It shows pending. It means that he is capable to execute on his plan. So let's go back to our, sorry. Let's go back to our presentation, because now with the demo, you could see in real world that it's easier to follow an attack with the MITRE framework in mind. You can really see from the perspective of the attacker. You can communicate each one of the steps, each one of the events, between, the collaborating teams, both security and response teams. And the common language use is going to be a major benefit to act fast. Now let's switch hats and go to the defense team side, and we have tons of good news. First, I would like to talk about an open source project, Falco. Falco is currently in incubation phase in CNCF. Falco is the de facto, we can say that is de facto standard for runtime security, container runtime security. Currently, there are almost 30 million almost 30 million downloads of Falco out there. And the Falco ecosystem is growing with other projects as well. An event generator project that, enables you to test your rules. Also, the Falco Sidekick, which is a project that enables you to have a central point to collect, the events from all the Falco's instances you have in your environment. And we can see that all these projects, including Falco itself, is growing really fast. It's a very active and motivated community. And more good news, these 30 million downloaders out there have been busy, using Falco to detect that those very steps, TTP steps that we talked about, making sure that you can detect that in real time, because that's when you can be most effective. So you don't start from ground zero. There is a lot of Falco tools already mapped to MITRE ATT&CK. So Falco was created by Sysdig. Sysdig donated Falco to the open source solution community. So let's talk a little bit more about Sysdig and what it offers in terms of securing your cloud and container environment. So Sysdig offers secure DevOps platform, and we want we focus on three main areas. One is that we really think that open source is very valuable in security. The validation, the transparency of the speed of innovation of an open source community is fundamental to keep up with this complex threat world that is developing out there. So besides Falco, Sysdig is also an open source project, and we embrace also Prometheus and put a lot of monitoring infrastructure and monitoring in our platform. On top of Prometheus, we also use Cloud Custodian to offer cloud configuration and asset discovery. And both Prometheus and Cloud Custodian is also part of CNCF. So we built our platform on top of open source. We also believe that deep visibility is fundamental. You protect better if you see clear. You can only see clear if you see in the details that you need to remove any kind of ambiguity and be narrow focus on what needs to be done in real time. And another thing is that security cannot be on the way of productivity, or has to be as agile, as easy as everything else that happens in the cloud. So we offer as a SaaS platform, and to get started, you just need a daemon set deployment or a Fargate task. So in terms of use case that we offer to our user community, we want to make sure that we assist them in protecting their entire software life cycle, and starting from the coding stage, when they define even defining their infrastructure. Today infrastructure is code, as security has to be also. And so we make sure that we give them means to check their terraforms, their Helm chart, make sure that the configurations that are there and the declarative configuration that the developers have in their infrastructure as code, it's in line with the security posture that you have defined for your organization. And as it goes in the building cycle, we also integrate with the CI/CD tools to make sure that image scanning is part of the building process. So those kind of images with malicious code or with vulnerability doesn't get to your production environment. We also integrate or embed in our platform native Kubernetes admission controls, so you can also stop a deployment if it doesn't meet your security standards. As it goes into your production environment, you cannot lower your guards. The bad actors are there, taking valid accounts, finding credentials and trying to undermine your cloud posture to make their actions easier and undetectable. So you need to have a continuous check if the cloud configurations that you defined as the security guideline, it's still in place, has been not modified. And you can do this, you have to do this in a continuous basis. We provide also configuration check for your Kubernetes control plane as well. So both the cloud infrastructure and your Kubernetes infrastructure needs to be checked in terms of, if what has been defined as infrastructure security is in place and stays in place. With regards to runtime security, that's when Falco shines the most, because Falco is there catching everything that is going on at system level that can be seen at the system call levels. So all the weird process running activities or file activities, network activities, user activities, Falco also looks into Kubernetes audit to see if there is anything going on with regards to the communication, the data plane communication. So Falco is really your security guard there, making sure that the bad guy is caught in action. But there is even, as Aaron said, please, you need to consider breach. If you are dealing in a situation of an event, you need to have you need to have your response team with the visibility that they would need to understand that event. And that's when our customer also come to us and praise what we offer, because Sysdig provides that kind of visibility, and we can give them a visibility very granular visibility before the event, when the things are building up to that culmination, but also after the event. So you have a full window of granular visibility to understand what is going on, to contain what is happening, and also look to see what kind of impact that caused. So this is really a completely code source to production kind of security. One thing that we like to point out also is that when you are dealing with the modern cyber crime and threats, in the cloud native environment, you cannot separate what is happening in the cloud and what is happening in your workload. If you have these two things observed from different tools, you have a gap in your ability to detect and respond. So we believe in a unified security platform, because as we've seen, the attack is not one event, but a sequence of steps, and they go from your cloud environment, your workload environment, and back and forth. And you need to be able to detect both together with the same policy language. So there is no gap in semantics either. And the same security event pool or storage. So you can build a timeline of events and understand what is going on deeply and fully. So more good news is that there is a lot of rules already in place in Sysdig. So besides, all the rules that the Falco community is mapping, we add to that, the rules that we've seen as being effective, implemented by our users, and it has been effective to protect both the cloud and container and the Kubernetes, which is kind of in between the infrastructure and your workload. So, and we have a lot of rules out of the box ready for you to use for both MITRE attack framework, but all kinds of compliance that, benchmark to AWS, for example. We have tons of rules already ready for you to use. And if you want to learn more, to get a little more insight in terms of more modern threats and what you can do to protect your cloud and your container environment, our website is really rich of resource. You can find a guide for AWS and Sysdig working together. That attack that we just experienced was done by our threat research engineer, Stefan. He wrote a very, very interesting blog about MITRE ATT&CK. Please check it out. It gives you a really good insight. And there is a lot of good news about Sysdig too. We just acquired a policy. The Sysdig is growing in its platform capabilities. So to provide our customer the ability to do automatic remediation on your cloud posture, but also give you a good way to manage permissions, so over permissioning or, privileged accounts are one of the leading cause of breach and lateral movement in cloud. So we are enriching our platform to give you that even more capability to keep your cloud, Kubernetes and container environment secure. So, and the best way to start is just trying, and we have lots of good options for you to start for free. Besides a Falco community as well, you can start there as well. But with Sysdig, you will feel comfortable to really get familiar with the platform, see what it can do for you, and to unify your cloud and container security. Just check what would you like to start with and go from there. Julio, so now we open for Q&A.
Yes, we do. And we do have a couple of questions, but before I get to those, I just want to remind everybody that you can submit questions by going to the Q&A tab next to chat and submitting your questions there. One question we have here is, how can the multi-cloud environments be efficiently secured? What are the proactive approaches we can consider?
Multi-cloud, yes. So as of today, we know that companies, they have a cloud presence in multiple platforms, and Sysdig also provide that kind of multi-cloud visibility. So you can start by having, again, the same platform to monitor one cloud, to monitor all your cloud presence. So that whole idea of having one language, one event store, one platform, really expedite your learning curve and also close any gap that you may have in terms of understand where the security threats are.
And Julio, I see a question. When security is breached or the environment is attacked, what are the immediate steps we need to take? So Daniel, I'll definitely want to hear your perspective on this too. But the very first thing to do would be to rotate and delete all of your root and AWS IAM access keys. Delete any potentially unauthorized IAM users. So keeping a running a log of who those users are and being able to see the difference would be a huge part of that. And also changing the password for those users. Next, check your bill. This can help you very easily identify resources that you didn't create. So especially if you have CloudWatch set up in a way to give you billing alerts, this is a good way to do it automatically. But definitely look for any indication, say of spinning up resources to run crypto mining, for example. Another thing you can do, and this is especially easy to do if you're following an infrastructure as code approach, is to delete any resources that you didn't create. So if you notice a diff from the resources that you defined, definitely delete those. Another thing, that you can do reactively, although it would make sense to do this anyways, is to enable MFA on a root user. That way, if for whatever reason there was a root user that didn't have MFA and the attacker has access to them, now they would need to go through this extra step to use that account. Verify that the account information is correct. You want to make sure that the address and all the settings are there. And then, of course, reach out to the AWS Support Center. So you can find all these steps if you ask, what do you do if you notice unauthorized activity in an AWS account? But as far as incident response and how to use a tool like Sysdig, I think there's even more you can do as far as setting up automation and policies. So Daniela, please, if you have something to comment on there, I give the floor to you.
Yeah, so what I would say is that, first of all, to understand the breach in its full impact. And if you have already the mechanism in place, it helps you. If you have a way to verify the drift, as Aaron just mentioned, what was in your original infrastructure as code, Terraform or Helm chart that has been changed, and go there and make that to conform with what it should be, the desired state. Another thing that you can do with Sysdig is, as I mentioned, as part of our response capabilities, you can, for certain types of incidents, you can define, the capture. And the capture is that you can, in a window, you can see exactly what happened right before, what was the past, what they did, what kind of resource they used, and go back and start, improve your defenses there. So with Sysdig, you can have that visibility to see exactly where they impact. And with Falco, you can detect also what are the anomalies and see the full attack in place and go to those points and make the necessary adjustments that needs to be done. And in the MITRE framework, you will see also the specific mitigation actions that you can have in order to prevent that attack, contain that attack as well.
Okay, excellent. We also have another question here. What are some of the known issues which the developer community is continuing to resolve with respect to MITRE attacks?
Could you repeat again? What are the known issues that the community is?
Yes. What are some of the known issues which the developer community is continuing to resolve with respect to MITRE attacks?
For sure.
Oh, Aaron, do you want to say something?
Yeah, there's one that kind of pops out to me, which is in terms of trusted relationships and, say, hijacking sessions. So if you look at MITRE ATT&CK at all the different ways that you could see that path coming through, such as being able to log in from various locations, being able to hijack a session, being able to use like a reputable IP address, but as a proxy, etc. The major shift there would be in what's commonly referred to as zero trust, and you see a lot of new development today around how to implement zero trust in a way that's not too complicated. So, for example, the use of mutual TLS or creating sessions between resources. Certainly in AWS, one thing that we strongly emphasize when creating policies is defining the trusted principal. So saying, the only principal that should be able to assume this role would be a Lambda or EC2. If a CLI user is attempting to access that role, that's definitely something suspicious going on, and something that you should prevent off the bat, not waiting to detect this type of access, but just from the get-go, saying the only type of resource that can assume this role is one that I expect in my environment. So moving to zero trust, another aspect of that you might see would be, for example, with the instance metadata service. So it used to be with instant metadata service version 1, which is still available, that you can see, you can query credentials for a particular resource. In version 2, which came out in 2019, we've now created a session whenever a resource is basically using those credentials to prevent, say, someone from using SSRF, a server-side request forgery, to get credentials basically to a resource in an AWS account, and then to try to use those credentials to access things further down the line. So all this goes along with unsecured credentials, session data, access tokens, etc. And if you look at MITRE ATT&CK, especially in the credential access section, but even in other sections like lateral movement, you'll see this common pattern emerging. And that, I think, is where a lot of development is moving to, because if you've solved that problem, you make it you make it considerably more difficult for an attacker to simply reuse something they found. But Daniela, based on your presentation, I think that you have a lot to add to this, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yes, I have 4 points that I'd like to make. One is about a privilege management. This is one of the main resources that attackers use to move laterally, and it's easier said than done. We always say that least privilege principle. Oh, yeah, that's wise, but implementing this is not easy. Because of most of the time, what you want to do is to get your code running without being blocked by something in the way. In the way of production, nothing, not even security. So most of the time, the privileges are given based on, you can at least do that. Everything else is profit, and from the attacker, yes, it's profit. So from the security team to put in place tools and capabilities to kind of guide them in terms of who is getting more permissions than they are actually in use, and bring that to a balance point. So production is good, security is good. Another thing is supply chain. The attackers are really smart about making sure that they get as early as possible in the code development cycle. Even your IDE is not safe. There are already, attacks that goes inside of the developers' development environment and embedded in every project that they do some malicious code. So whatever you build in your pipeline there is already infected. It's not the repository that opening the gates. It's your environment that is already infected. So there is a lot of development there in terms of detecting early and preventing those kind of supply chain attacks. They are the most dreadful one because the impact reach is tremendous. Wherever that code goes, the attacker goes with it. And another one that I would say is leveraging using native controls. Kubernetes it's there everywhere. It's used vastly, and offers native controls for you to really control who talks to each other, your networking traffic, and behavior. You can have a good grasp on it, but you just need to leverage and understand that communication, and make sure that that least privilege kind of scenario for permission you apply to service as well. It should not be communicating to this other IP address outside or this other service. This is anomalous. So these are the 4, I think, vectors that I see in terms of security evolving.
Excellent. Okay, and would you recommend starting with Falco? Why would I choose Falco versus Sysdig Secure, or vice versa?
It's up to you. Starting with Falco or starting with Sysdig, you are starting with Falco. Sysdig is built on top of Falco. The rules that you create in Falco, you can just bring to Sysdig. The advantage of starting with Sysdig is because it's not just Falco, it's not just runtime. You can also experience a unified cloud and container secure DevOps environment for everything, for your infrastructure as code to catch, threats and vulnerabilities, early on in the development cycle, to the runtime where, Falco shines, and is really the standard for runtime security. So you can start either way. Both will offer you great capabilities and an excited community of users, and you don't start from ground zero. As I showed you, there is a lot of rules already in place, and you can just start using.
Okay, we did receive another question here. I find developers copy codes from open outside sources for ease of task accomplishment. What is the methodology to find such code lines from the source code?
Aaron, do you want to say something?
Well, I could say that there is, on the AWS side with CodeGuru, there is definitely a way to put some controls in place. But as far as being able to detect what was copied, that's a pretty good question. I would say here the key is, if you're doing SAST and DAST, from a security angle, actually analyzing the code as it comes in, and just as you mentioned, Daniela, that attackers are now getting into the IDE. By the same token, security controls are now also moving to the IDE. So I think there's a lot of solutions that exist today to just check for the security of code, if that's the concern. But it depends on on why you would be worried about the copied code coming in. If it's purely security, treat it as SAST. If it's more an issue of ownership, liability, etc., that's somewhat of a broader question that I don't have as good an answer to. But Danielle, I'd pass it to you.
I think I'm from the same position. Yes, you want to scan your code, and with Sysdig you can do that scanning, but there are two perspectives. One is licensing or authorization of use, making sure that what you're using there, you are actually, you should be using. Another one is how safe is that code? And usually is associated to each other, because if you are using things that, are not really it is not really appropriate, chances are that it was put there with a malicious intent. So with Sysdig you can do you can do scanning on your code process, but I can follow up with you with regards to exactly what are the rules that you can have in place to start detecting those kind of code discrepancy or alerting zones that could give you a good sense that this is not safe.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're at the top of the hour, but I did just want to remind everybody that today's webinar has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending an email with a link to access the webinar on demand. The webinar will also be available on devops.com. Just look in the on-demand section of the webinar page, and it should be there. And now to our 4 Amazon gift card winners. Our winners today are Jane C. Congratulations, Jane. Next we have Enrique P. And next we have Douglas F. Congratulations. And finally, Maria S. So congratulations to all our winners. We will be reaching out to you via email with instructions for claiming your Amazon gift card. So please check your inbox. If you don't see it there, be sure to check your spam folder. Thanks again to Daniela and Aaron for an excellent webinar, and thank you for the audience for all your engagement and your questions. This is Julio Godinez signing off until next time. Be well.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.